What is going on, Adam? How you doing?
Good, man. Good. How are you?
Very good. I'm sure not like almost anyone knows that your real name is Adam because every time you're here, it's always men's
Just
bikini
fucking man.
coach.
I'll leave it. I mean, it was a joke, but I feel like it's catching on now because people
Yeah,
actually fucking refer to me as that. And I was like, men's bikini athlete. I was like, fuck.
the MBC dude. That's what you are.
I'll take it.
So as always, guys, we are going to go through and ask as many questions as we can, or answer as many questions as we can. Just mostly talking shop about what kind of questions those are, and then giving you answers that are hopefully clairvoyant enough for you to enact them and somewhat be actionable. With that, though, I do want to mention down below in the description of every video or all of these lives, we have 3 links, and those links are going to be one, a free link to like a blood work cheat sheet guide, which tells you reference ranges as well as gives you the certain biomarkers that we'd like you to get or you should get as a person interested in their health. The second link is going to be for a 16-week brief program that's been periodized by me. This was created a while ago, so some of the architectures have changed by now since the last time I put that out, but it is there. And then the last one is a free dosing guide, which allows you to use the concentration of the compound selected and figure out, depending on what dosing frequency you do, how much milliliters you need to have, so you can kind of do the math quickly in your head. But anyways, on to business. So we actually already, thankfully enough, I actually had scheduled this like a week in advance so people were able to see that we actually had this going. And you have a functional mic now, which is awesome because that's like
Yes.
our number one set of comments is everyone's like, we love this. And then the second series of comments are like, this fucking sucks. Get the Aussie new mic. And so whatever, right? Like we're here,
Yep.
we're living. But actually got a question already from Michael. Have you noticed any acromegaly sides with GH? My nose and feet are growing. This is actually a really good question. I'll defer to you though.
Me personally, no. Maybe because my exposure to GH has been relatively new. Obviously I've done my due diligence and, been reading up on growth hormone for a number of years, but actually mainly due to availability, quality, and even I would argue the need for it. I only recently started using it literally this year. So with myself personally, no, but I know you have, and I know multiple other people who have definitely increased shoe size, appendages like nose, even ears, and hands that have grown.
Yeah, substantial. It's funny that this was actually brought up because I was just basically have PubMed send me a series of updated articles every couple weeks, and it's all the new data that's been published as of that month. And so I pulled one from the Journal of Front of Endocrinology, and it was about interpreting growth hormone and IGF-1 results using modern assays and reference ranges for the monitoring and treatment effectiveness in acromegaly. And basically, they asked the question of like, is it growth hormone or is it IGF-1 that is the driver of acromegaly, and not just like both? Because every test basically either measures growth hormone and not the outcome of IGF-1, or they measure both of them not one of them in isolation. And so they actually found that it was primarily IGF-1 mediated that were the causal side effects of acromegaly, like the growth and the odd kind of bone shapes, the jaw, forehead structure, that kind of thing. And so generally speaking, and I think this is almost fundamental across the sport, you can shake a bodybuilder's hand and you'll notice that some bodybuilders have absolutely gargantuan hand. And we know a guy named Nick, also an Aussie, moved to Thailand, and his
Yeah.
hands are stupid big. They're huge, right? But the dude's never abused, and he I think most people would consider him to be a liar when they talk about his total gear usage and total growth hormone usage. And it's actually quite shocking to see how big his hands are. And so I think there's some individuals who just naturally have the proclivity to have a higher IGF-1, and you might be one of those guys. Now, I think any kind of IGF-1 elevation is going to lead to some structural changes, and that's true across the board. So like you can go on this very channel back when I used to record like the first videos of myself ever as a natural pro bodybuilder working out to my natural pro card was you'll see the huge architectural difference within my face. Like my jawline is much thinner. My forehead is like kind of smoother, not as wrinkled. My nose is smaller. Little things that I notice, and you'd have to like have a picture up to kind of like really see the changes, but they certainly are there and they did happen. So you're gonna experience some fundamental changes just because your hormones are fluctuating, but the extent of those changes, I'm not so sure they're gonna be as drastic. I'd say like a lot of them are gonna be more artificial and temporary, but the ones that you will see is going to be like for sure your foot size might increase, your nose and like cartilage in your ear will definitely get a little bit bigger. Your skin might wrinkle a little bit more just because you're turning over cells a bit faster rate, so skin ages at a faster rate. But outside of that, you really shouldn't see too much drastic outcomes that aren't necessarily quote unquote favorable. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. And well, on a non GH path that I've actually noticed was, I mean, I chew a lot of gum, and okay, this is a bit of my theory, so take it with a grain of salt. And I noticed
It's
that
like I
my
see where you're going with this
jaw,
already. Yeah.
yeah, my jaw seemed to change structure where, like, no, I wasn't using any of those like jaw
Jazzercise.
the jaws. I haven't been using any of that, but like I grind my teeth furiously when I train, so I chew gum to basically prevent me, fucking my teeth. And I noticed over the years, like my jaw structure got like more solid because even when I used to chew gum, it used to almost like I used to get almost DOMs in my jaw
Yeah.
from doing
Yeah.
it. Now I don't get it anymore, and I noticed like old photos of myself, my jaw is like significantly more pronounced, and I was like,
Yeah.
wonder.
Yeah. No, I can see that too from you too. I can even looking back, there was a couple pictures I had of you for advertisement stuff that you were it was when you were like really, really lean, but it was probably over a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And your face is like drastically like thinner in that
Yeah.
jawline area. And I actually agree with you because this is a good point. You as a bodybuilder, you eat 5, 6 meals a day. It's a lot of chewing. And that's like a lot of it is a lot of the times it could be beef, chicken, rice, potatoes, things that need to be chewed, fruit. And I think there is something to be said behind that because I do feel like, especially if I go out to eat, like just with normal people, the jaw pump is insane, especially with like high dose growth hormone and insulin. So
Yeah.
there is probably something to that too, that you get like facial structure. And there's one interesting thing, and I pointed this out to Hana today. We went to the new Absolute Recomp in Dallas, which is like Hani Rambod's new gym. And it's like a $1 trillion gym, dude. It looks insane.
Yeah.
And it was so funny because there was a girl there and she looked normal by most people's standards, but then she took her clothes off to pose and she was like very obviously a physique competitor, but still young, like still probably
Yeah.
like 19, 20 years old, very
Oh,
young
fuck.
looking.
Okay.
Right. But you could choose shredded, like dry, right? Like very vascular, like obviously on some DHT compounds. But what was a dead giveaway to me was like that chin, that under chin part, sort of that like buccal area was like distended, right? She had like that, like this kind of look, even though she was shredded to the bone, she still had that kind of jaw protrusion. And I was telling Hannah, I'm like, that's usually androgen mediated. So when someone has that, you usually can tell like they're on some sort of androgen, right? Or growth hormone. So there's still definitely little things that can cause changes in your face. And I think that's the downside. Vigorous Steve has a great video on this. And I think it's a really big eye opener for anyone who has these issues. He has a video where he was on 2 grams plus of testosterone when he was making YouTube videos. And then he put that YouTube video next to one where he was completely off cycle and then showed his face. And it literally looks like a different human being. Like it night and day looks completely different. And there's certainly some correlation between high dose growth hormone and testosterone, structural changes to your face and maybe even body, of course. And then when you're not on gear, maybe some of those come back to normal. But he did mention too that he seems to have retained like that nose and ears and those kind of, again, the cartilage. So yeah, there's definitely going to be some changes. I just don't know how significant. It kind of depends on each individual. Like my hands have gotten bigger, but they're not as big as, for example, Nick or even Aaron's hands are fucking huge, right? And I've been doing this shit for a while now, and I still don't have that kind of chunky finger shit going on. So it's very different per individual. Adam, you don't have like massive hands either, and you've been doing this for a while, so it's just kind of you have little boy hands. So I think like
little lady hands.
So I think it's kind of just individual dependent. It really is kind of like what is your milieu, and then maybe the luck of the draw is you get big sausage fingers and you make your lady happy, maybe just have tiny ladyboy fingers and
Make
whatever.
lady boys happy.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. For sure. That's a good
I
question.
shouldn't say that because there's some really jacked ones at the gym I train at who probably can outlive the fuck out of me. So I'll just keep quiet.
Is there actually?
Dude, the gym I train at, I would say that the females are more jacked and there's more IFBB pro females than the males, which is true.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think they just don't care? They're sort of they don't understand the extent of what they're doing to themselves? They maybe okay.
Look, lovely ladies, actually all very nice. But yeah, it's like I've had a conversation with a few of them and it's like immediately like, oh, what's up, Adam? I'm like, oh fuck.
What was that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough.
Yeah.
It sucks because I wonder that a lot is those third world or the first world countries where androgens are relatively easy to access.
Mhm.
These girls who are wanting to compete and stuff probably have no clue, and like no one who's helping them have any kind of clue, and so they're just winging it. And I can't imagine the shit they're doing to themselves, but
Yeah. Like, look, like they look fantastic. They're super jacked, but yeah, like almost all of them have spoken to have like significant signs of viralization.
yeah, damn, that sucks, man.
Mhm.
That sucks. Okay, well, less enlarged clitoris, more Q&A. Did you get any questions this week for any kind of cool stuff?
Yeah, I got an interesting one. This is probably based off good old Aaron and Chris's experiences with it. But what are your thoughts on nandrolone only cycles and basically either nandrolone only or nandrolone with a very, very low testosterone base? So I would throw out some numbers there like 400 to 600 milligrams of nandrolone weekly combined with 50 to 100 milligrams of testosterone.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's also so I understand practical application is going to be a lot different than what research has to tell us, because in isolation, it seems that nandrolone can cause a lot of the neurological issues that are kind of hallmark to androgen abuse. And I definitely wouldn't want to singularly hammer that pathway, basically the progestogenic pathway, as a fear of getting that sort of early onset cognitive decline myself. So, but this was, when I was starting gear, so I turned pro naturally in the PMBA I was 20 years old. And then shortly after that, like literally backstage, I started pinning gear. And I noticed a drastic, rapid acceleration of my hair loss. Now, of course, I became more cognizant of it. So whether it was actually increasing its loss or if it was just like me actually paying attention, I don't know. But there was definitely, I think, something going on there. And at that point in time, like I was so stupid, right? It was my like early genesis to all this stuff. I just started really digging into it. The only clue I had was Chavez. What is his name? His first name?
Broderick.
Yep, Roderick Chavez. And I had his membership website when I was like 20, and it was still a lot of skewed information back then, even from him. And I was taking like Anadrol, and I was taking all sorts of fuck shit, dude, like DHB. I was taking methyltren, like literally just like, oh, I wonder what this does. I wonder what this does. So I'd like buy it, use it for a couple weeks, and be like, oh fuck. So my shit was falling out, and so I was like, I need to figure this out. And so I saw back then, I'm forgetting a bunch of names right now. Who's the guy who is like known for coaching based on nandrolone only? It's
I know you're talking about.
Yeah, Steve just had him on his podcast. I can't exactly remember his name. But he was very proficient on YouTube. That was when he was putting videos out regularly. So of course, like I got exposed via the algorithm. And so I was like, this is the answer, right? I want to save my hair. I'm experiencing these side effects. So I did nandrolone only and he said, like, you have to get the dose quite high. Yes, Client Clark. And he said you had to get the dose quite high to see a reasonable effect like beyond what you've probably normally done in testosterone. So I did that. I was like, I think 850 milligrams of testosterone. Now, mind you, this is like a very turbulent time within my use, because I'd go from like one thing to another in like 4 weeks and I wouldn't see progress, and I'd be like, it's not fucking working. So like I'd have to try another thing. But during that period of time, my sort of blood pressure. My blood pressure and resting heart rate was radically elevated. Like I have never experienced nosebleeds at the rate that I had when I was doing nandrolone only. And the other problem was that the psychological issues were pretty rampant as well. I was noticing that I would get, so I used to do a lot of public speaking during that time. And it was the first time ever, and I talked to Paul about this in one of the podcasts actually, but it was the first time ever that I had to stop public speaking. This is like in a group of several hundred people I was on a stage and they were in the audience, right? It was like a auditorium, and I had to stop speaking because like my heart rate wouldn't settle down and I like started sweating profusely and I couldn't catch my breath. You know, like your throat dries and sort of like you can't catch your breath. And that was like the only time that has ever happened to me. And that was on nandrolone only. So for me, there was definitely benefit in it because the one thing I will note is that my skin looked healthier for sure. My pores weren't as big and like I didn't have as much acne, even though I've never really had bad acne from gear. I'll still get, you know, little crop ups of acne here and there. And I will say that my hair wasn't falling out at all, basically. I mean, it basically completely stopped for several weeks during that period of time. Yeah, I would try to pull it out, you know, just because I got so used to grabbing it and then like pulling to see like how many hair follicles came out of that shit. And it got to a point where there was almost nothing, which was really interesting. But the blood pressure and the resting heart rate in combination with like those panic attacks was just not worth it to me. And it was so awful. And I probably could have gone about it in a lot different ways. Like, you know, I had
Mhm.
likely a lot of excess metabolites in my system from the copious amount of compounds I had mixed around with prior to that. And then I probably also didn't have like sufficient levels of estrogen or sexual hormone binding globulin or various different things. So I think if I would have done it maybe with a little bit of testosterone, those things might have been averted. But even to this day, I like nandrolone, something that generally doesn't make me feel super awesome if I'm using it plus 300-ish milligrams. It seems to be one of those problematic compounds. So I think it can be good. Moral of the story, if especially you're an individual who has high degrees of side effects from DHT being converted from testosterone, of course, and you don't want to take a 5 alpha reductase inhibitor, but I do believe that there's probably some cognitive effects on a small term and a long term timetable.
Mm. No, I agree with you, and I think it's been chatted about a few times. But when it comes to PEDs and anabolics and what you're running, it's basically choose the compound stack based on the side effects you want to avoid. So based on the nandrolone thing, if you are someone who's really concerned about hair loss, if you're an individual who aromatizes extremely hard, or you have a high conversion to estradiol, potentially you could be a candidate for it. But as you said, and this is one of the main reasons why I personally, at least, have not trialed it yet, so I'm taking this with a grain of salt because I'm not talking from personal experience, but the cognitive effects, cognitive decline, neurological effects, not just all from, not even from emotional side, like, people developing anxiety, but as you said, cognitive decline, crossing the blood-brain barrier. That is what sort of has always frightened me, where I was like, I'll keep my brain, I'll lose my hair.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree with
From that.
you. I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's funny enough. I guess people probably know, or maybe if they follow me, but I shaved my head uh, just before going to Thailand. So this is like 2 months ago, 3 months ago,
Yeah.
and the attempt in doing that wasn't because I was balding or anything, but it was more so just to see what it would be like if I had gone bald and how people would see me. So like basically, I shaved it, didn't tell anyone anything, and then watched people's reactions, and I was honestly really surprised. Most people didn't care. It made no difference in my interactions on social media. In fact, it probably boosted the algorithm a little bit because there was a lot of interactions on posts for some time. But it was one of those things where I realized this is really just like an ego death thing. Like you just have to kind of be okay with the fact that hair is a sort of momentary thing in life for a lot of people.
Mhm.
I think it's 1 in 3 men go bald, and so that's a lot of fucking people, right? That's 33% of men essentially. That's like no small figure. And that character that you might have underneath the hair is probably worth more than the hair itself. So that's sort of the belief I have too, is like I really do think that maintaining cognitive function and improving health metrics over a long enough period of time is going to be the essential factor in your life, not necessarily the outcomes of your hair and aesthetics. While they do matter, I don't think they're that critical.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Funny you said that. I did the exact same thing when I would notice my first bit of hair loss, because I noticed like zero hair loss for multiple years. I think for me, the combination was, a stack of Primobolan, a little bit of Anavar, Maestron, basically like, the all-star DHT stack was also the all-star hair loss stack for me.
Yeah.
And then I noticed some hair loss. I was like, oh, fuck. And then, basically same thing, shaved it bald and looked at myself and was like, I can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have a good head shape too. Like, you're not gonna, as long as you got the hobbit on your side, you're not really gonna need to have a beautiful, handsome scalp for any particular reason. So
exactly.
Good question from David Brown. Welcome to the team, by the way. He's a new client. Or he will be, I should say. He's doing a delayed start. He'll be on in like 2-ish weeks' time. But he asks, would ProScar help with DHT? So it actually, of course it would. So ProScar, for those who don't know, it's basically a larger dose of finasteride. So normally finasteride comes in about a 0.5 milligram to 1 milligram dose taken daily. ProScar is actually meant for people with like prostate relevant issues, and it is a 5 milligram tablet. So it can, obviously, its treatment purpose is to annihilate DHT. But the problem is that DHT is a physiologically necessary hormone, and it seems that when you reduce that 5-alpha reductase molecule, there's also like a lot of other ones that we don't consider too. So there's several 5-alpha reductase enzymes that we don't necessarily consider when we talk about inhibition. And a lot of those end up in our brain too, like talking about neural steroids like DHEA sulfate, pregnenolone, allopregnenolone. And so when you take a high dose of these 5-alpha reductase inhibitors, you can potentially see some psychological side effects over a long enough time horizon. I personally don't like to potentiate symptoms like that. Again, I care about my mental health, so ensuring that there is some degree of DHT within the brain is, and also other neurosteroids. That's why I take DHEA sulfate and pregnenolone on a daily basis, but it is really important to me. So that's kind of my thoughts.
Don't forget the propensity to have, reductions in erection quality and the other libido issues that come with most 5-alpha reductase inhibitors. That's why, Kolton and I were chatting about before the stream, prefer to go for topical variants. So you can get topical finasteride, topical dutasteride, which you can apply on the scalp. I don't believe it's as effective as the oral, but I think given that it's basically has a benign side effect profile, I think it's worth it. You can try something called dutasteride, which is a much longer half-life than finasteride. And I think also they've shown studies where it seems to save a bit more hair follicles than finasteride. Yeah. I can't remember the exact study, but I remember recording something like they saw that finasteride saved, I want to say, about 80-something% of hair follicles, where dutasteride was like, high in the 90s.
Right.
But what you could do is an intermittent dosing protocol where you take, 0.5 milligrams of dutasteride, every 5 to 10 days, which would hopefully basically microdose it to ensure that you have less side effects, and then combine that with a topical dutasteride finasteride if you were trying to mitigate the side effects from that.
No, that's an outstanding piece of advice. Yeah, I think as a replacement, the topical variants are going to be most ideal. And dutasteride does seem to be, in all cases, more effective than finasteride without the significant onset of side effects too, because there's, like I said, there's various different 5-alpha reductase molecules. And so the dutasteride is essentially more of an evolutionary drug where it's been developed later in time, and thus it's a little bit more selective, thus leading to less consequential side effects of like post-finasteride syndrome, right? There's a reason it's post-finasteride and not post-dutasteride. So there's a lot of benefits to using dutasteride if that is something you're planning on doing. But excellent question.
Yep. And just a random fact is that it seems that finasteride is more popular in Western countries, because here in Thailand, most Asian countries, I've spoken to athletes and clients and just friends from, they all use dutasteride. Like, no one uses finasteride, which I thought was quite interesting. Yeah. I've even asked for finasteride here, and they're like, can get it, but it's like everything's dutasteride. So I was like, Okay.
It's so funny. Yeah, because it's like, I remember, again, when I was going through this crisis of losing hair and I determined that nandrolone only wasn't effective. I went to the, dermatologist at the time because I was covered through the military, as I was still serving at that time, and basically, they were like, "Yeah, here's fucking finasteride, like 1 milligram a day, no questions asked," and,
Mm.
um, they did that in conjunction. The lady was actually pretty privy. She did that in conjunction with a 3%, um, uh,
Minoxidil?
no, the,
Are
God dang
you
it,
fine?
no, the I'm slowly forgetting everything today.
My
The
topical metformin?
shampoo, the
Oh,
shampoo,
the DHT, what was it?
ketoconazole shampoo, 3%
Ketoconazole, okay.
ketoconazole shampoo. Because in America,
Yeah,
you can only get it at 2%. She got it
right.
at 3%, so I was
Mm.
using that in conjunction with finasteride, and that's when I learned very quickly that I don't like finasteride. Like, it took a month and a half to use it, and I was like, "Nope, fuck this." So,
Yeah.
uh, and then since then, I laterally moved to topical solutions.
Mm.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so we're kind of waiting on questions getting developed in the comments here, but what kind of questions did you stem across this week anymore outside of what we've already
Yeah.
got?
Yeah, so this was another one which was quite interesting, which was thoughts on in a sort of push-up phase or growth phase or any phase where you're titrating doses. So let's narrow it down to a push-up phase. What are your thoughts on titrating doses on an as-needed basis? So when I mean as-needed basis, similar to like what maybe John Jerd or other coaches in the space do, where if body composition is worsening, strength is not going up in the gym, and you've already pushed food, generally we look at increasing the gear dosage versus having a smaller set period of time and just pushing to peak dosages in a
Mhm.
short period. So, let's say an individual would titrate from I'm just going to take testosterone, 250, reach a platform, go to 500, 750, maybe end up at 1,000, versus someone maybe in a much shorter time frame, going 500, 1,000, and then staying at 1,000 at a peak concentration, a peak time for, I don't know, anywhere from 8 to 12 weeks or whatever their surplus phase is. What are your thoughts on the different approaches?
So I look at it kind of the same way as cardio. Now,
Mm.
obviously, more gear will work better, but it's sort of like how long can you expose yourself to gear, right? So if I'm on a prep and I need to do expenditure, I'm not going to make all my expenditure like high intensity activity because in a moment, yes, the amplitude of calories will be burnt much higher. Like I'll have a higher amplitude of calories burned during a smaller period of time. But the effect of that is a greater degree of fatigue. And then also, probably for the rest of the day, I'm burning much less calories due to being exhausted. And my training itself is fundamentally kind of broken from having a higher intensity training bout that was induced via cardio and not actually weightlifting. And the same thing can be said about using androgens. Like in this scenario, we don't want to do hit on prep. We'd rather do something like low intensity, steady state cardio, focusing more on steps and even like a slight incline treadmill walk, as that doesn't induce so much fatigue and it's more a area under curve of exposure, not necessarily an amplitude thing. So like, yes, the amplitude is less. You're not burning as many calories, but your area under curve of burning calories is so much higher. It ends up as a net benefit. And the same thing can be said about androgens, right? If we increase the dose for a short period of time at a really, really high dose, like let's say maximum threshold, the potential for that dose to work is really high and it might work very well. But also, you have to consider the fact that you aren't going to be able to sustain it for very long at all. And the problem will be primarily that I can't run this past 8 to 12 weeks. Versus if you take the other approach, the area under curve of exposure to a super physiological dose is much, much greater. And sometimes it can be almost a year long, if not more, depending on how you do it. So I think the titration model is best because it allows for a greater area under curve of exposure, leading to a favorable outcome long term. And I'm not saying like low doses are more significant by any means, but it's just like being structural with your dosing is pretty important.
Yeah. And I would tend to agree with you too. I mean, so it depends what I want to preface it with depends what your goals are, right? If your
Yeah.
goal is you're not a competitor, you're not looking to have a serious bodybuilding career, I would always, 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 always advise with the less is more approach where you basically try squeeze out as much progress you can from each dose. What I mean by that is you have a dose of testosterone or total anabolics, and you basically try really focus on your training, your nutrition, titrate those, and get the most progress you can from that dosage to mitigate the side effects and long-term health consequences, rather than an individual who doesn't focus too much on training, doesn't focus on that, and basically gets all their progression from titrations of gear. So and that is going to lead to, obviously, a shorter career and potentially health problems, especially when you're not doing it as a career, or as to be, a serious, I shouldn't say serious bodybuilder, but doing it as a career. But I agree with you too that, yeah, if you are looking to put in as much mass as possible, there's going to be a time when you are at peak dosages, but as you said, the time of exposure can make all the difference. So yeah, I agree with you there. But yeah, segueing from that, actually, I had a interesting follow-up question, because this was actually a conversation I'm having with a bunch of guys who asked me a question at the gym. But thoughts on why you often see like beginners or smaller individuals use larger doses and basically go nowhere, like doses that more than me and you have used at that period of time. I've definitely had many athletes and clients come to me, and it's like over 1,000 milligrams total use, and these guys have been training less than 2 years, or even 1 year in one case. Now, my theory is, besides that, the training and nutrition is not there, would you say potentially that the larger you are, the higher propensity to have more androgen receptors, and also the longer exposure you've had to PEDs, the more androgen receptors you potentially have? So if you take a new individual who doesn't have a lot of muscle mass, doesn't have a long exposure to PEDs, has limited amount of androgen receptors, yes, on that higher doses they'll develop new androgen receptors, but maybe aren't as responsive to it, because you basically, if you're trying to think about it, you have a funnel and you're trying to shove a lot of water or whatever material through it, but because they don't have a lot of androgen receptors, you're not going to get much, which is why they don't get much out of it, besides the training and obviously nutrition not being on point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. The first thing I thought about was similar to what you said, is that over a certain duration of time you accumulate androgen receptor density, but mine was more along the lines of, like, we certainly know you create more myonuclei, like you create new nuclear donation happens, so you have more myonuclei. These myonuclei are the guys that signal for protein creation. So in theory, someone who's trained 5 years is going to have more myonuclei than someone or satellite cells, or whatever you want to call them, who has been training for a year. And so then, activated molecularly through AR, you have a greater propensity for a higher rate of muscle protein synthesis. I think that could be a pretty key indication too, is like the actual degree of satellite cells you have being proliferated and activated by androgen receptors is much more, so the effect is multitudes greater. I also do think it's like, of course, like, let's put this in a vacuum, right? If we're talking about someone who's training efficiently and is eating the correct diet and like already doing everything that they should, their due diligence, I think that a lot of it is also mediated by as shitty as it is, like, natural selection. Like, those guys stand out, but maybe they're like, the reality is they're like 1 in 8 of the general population using androgens. It's just they don't get a response. I've met many of these people myself, and it's like they just virtually have no response. And it's kind of one of those situations where I think it's like a genomic thing. It's just like, dude, you don't like. There's some motherfuckers, like, I went to like I said, I went to Absolute Recon today, and I was like looking at these kids, and I'm like, dude, these guys are fucking younger than me, and they have like they're look like they wear a corset for a living, and they have like like a delt that hangs off 3 inches from their arm. Like, it blows my mind. They literally look like they have balloons inflated on their body, and they're shredded, and it's just like, what the fuck? And you have to realize there's levels to this thing, and I think with those individuals, maybe we look at them just like we look at the freaks, because they're like so rare, but maybe they're out there that they just don't respond to androgens. But I think a lot of it is time duration of training leads to myonuclear donation, which leads to greater proliferation of muscle tissue. And then when androgens are added, that expression is multiplied when you have more myonuclei, is my theory, maybe.
Yep. All the more, basically, long story short, all the more reason why, when you're starting out, get your diet and training on point, and when you if you choose to introduce PEDs, start on like very minimum effective doses. In my opinion, arguably TRT plus doses. So if I'll tell you the exact number, I would generally say like 200 milligrams of testosterone, 150, 200 milligrams of testosterone. See how you respond, see how you aromatize, and then go from there. Like, you're not going to benefit from, 1,000 milligrams of test and some tren. Like, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking, like, how much progress you can create on just 200 milligrams of testosterone. I think so many people are in complete disbelief of that, but it's like, the reality is like, that's a lot. Like, that's going to get you a lot of fucking progress, especially if you've not used something. And it's like, dude, you only have to wait 4 weeks to see how it works. Like, you only wait 4 weeks to be like, okay, this is really doing some shit. Like, I'm already getting stronger. I'm much fuller. I'm holding a little bit of water. And then it's like, you keep going, or you wait 4 weeks and you're like, okay, maybe then I can increase another 50 milligrams. But going up to like the, pre-described 500 milligrams, or, 500 milligrams of this and 500 milligrams of that, like, for your first cycle, it's just like, that's so stupid. There's like 90 reasons why you could do something much better with much less in that case. But I think as you age, of course, dose requirements go up. But that's, again, as you've had experience, you kind of know where your thresholds are, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a bit controversial, but I don't like using myself as an example because I'm a sample size of one with my own different variables and stuff. But I literally progressed from, low 80 kilos to 100 kilos on just pharmaceutical testosterone at no more than 250 milligrams. I think the peak dosage that I had used at that point in time was about 200 milligrams of testosterone with 100 milligrams of maestron. And when I tell people that, it's like, no, shut the fuck up. No, you didn't. Fuck off. And I was like, genuinely, I did. And it was literally for using it like twice per year until I reached a point where, I want to take bodybuilding, when I say more seriously, I mean competitively. And I realized that I couldn't progress past this point without actually, using more doses. But that was a significant amount of progress. So much so that, people would often ask, like, oh, you're running like, a gram and gear, things like that. I'd be like, no.
Yeah.
Because it was just supporting the, I would like to think, pretty dialed in diet and training I was doing. And yeah, it's really potent if you use it in the correct environment.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because my genesis and yours is so much different. I started out like the smart kid and got my pro card naturally, and then like right after I was the dumb kid. And I was like, well, let's just use, and then if it's not working, we'll just use more. So my first cycle was D-ball and testosterone, like the very typical bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And then the next thing I added was DHB, and it's like, bro, I barely was on testosterone for 5 weeks, and I'm already adding, a third compound in, and I don't even know what these things are really doing to me. My piss is like hyper yellow from DHB, which I think is more of an issue with its additives within the fluid itself, because it's so much of a dense molecule. But it was an experiment where I learned that more is not always better, especially out the gate, because what it did it effectively is like made me get confused. And I thought, like, man, is the stuff I'm even taking real? Like, I just don't think it's real. Am I doing the right gear? Maybe it's just that I'm not taking the right compound. And like, all this second guessing and experimenting led me to like absolutely fucking nothing, like my first 6 months of bodybuilding, where if I just stuck with 200 milligrams of testosterone and rocked that out for 6 months, I would imagine that I would be a lot more mentally stable at that point in my life, and I would have had more hair, and I would have made more progress because I would have focused on the stuff I already knew, which I kind of forgoed, which is the eating and the training and the cardio and the very basic, very sensical, mundane shit, and I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, look, my genesis was very fortunate because me originally being from South Africa, you can actually talk to medical professionals there without them jumping down your throat and being like, oh, you're going to kill yourself. And basically, I actually worked with an endocrinologist where I learned a lot of my initial, I guess, knowledge about blood work and how to interpret it. And he was all for using pharmaceutical only compounds. And that was basically testosterone only, or bioidentical hormones. And that's why I was basically only using that. And I was very fortunate that that was how I sort of was brought up or used it initially, because like I said, that led to really good results with basically no side effects. So I was quite fortunate there.
That is awesome, dude. It's such a it's a big reason that I think America sucks, is because like our medical system is so jacked up in that sense, where you can't even express like a desire to a doctor because they're like, no. Like, trust me, that's not right, dude. And it's like, I read in a textbook somewhere that this is, and it's like, no, you didn't, dude. Like, just get off
Yeah.
your high horse. And it's when you can have humility from a doctor, it's a really powerful thing because you can actually have an open relationship as opposed to something that's just like very, I am higher than thou and listen to what I have to say. And
Yeah.
then you end up doing the wrong shit like me. And that was exactly my case is right. I had a doctor and I said, well, this is what I'm taking. They're like, no, you need to take Clomid. Like, don't even take this stuff. Like, and it's like, just holy shit. Like they thought I was killing myself and actively I probably was because I was doing stupid shit. But if the guy would have been like, listen, I understand you have needs, I understand you're a bodybuilder. Let's just try 200 milligrams of testosterone. That positive influence would have led me to be for the next year probably a lot different in my practice, effectively being safer in the long term for sure.
Yeah,
um
definitely. I was gonna say we got some questions.
yeah, sorry, we've been rambling about that one. So when is the is not supposed to be the first thing, it's when is proviron
When
best used. So I have very scant opinions about this. I'll let you go first.
cough never. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Look, my ideal usage of proviron is probably in when you're using a lower dose of testosterone and maybe your SHBG is still quite high to
Mhm.
potentially potentiate more free and total testosterone. Use a bit of proviron to lower SHBG and increase free and total testosterone. So if you're in a health phase or TRT phase, that's when I would use it. Aside from then, there's better, I guess, anabolics or androgens that you can utilize for different purposes. I think be better. I know some. I mean, I once had someone told me that proviron thins your skin. That's why I use it pre-contest. That was wild.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of individuals also, pre-contest use it thinking that it gives them a harder look. And given the multitude of polypharmacy and other drugs they're taking, I would say no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Or it's not, or it's being completely overshadowed by the other pharmaceuticals. So, I mean, unless you have another use case for myself, it's more so in like a TRT plus protocol where
Yeah.
potentially I think it would be worthwhile.
Yeah, I agree, 100%. I think it is this sort of bro lore that's perpetuated its effectiveness.
Mhm.
And again, I'm a culprit here because Blue Taylor, the guy who was my coach, loved to mega dose proviron. I mean, 200, 150. I remember we started at 25 milligrams a day, and it escalated to 3 times a day, escalated to 4 times a day, then it escalated to 4 times a day plus the first dose was 2 tabs a day, so it was 50 plus 75, and then it kept going up to 175 milligrams, almost 200 milligrams at the end of the prep. And I'm like, what is this doing?
What
Like,
is the logic?
yeah, well, again, it thins your skin, bro. And it's just like I think these people sort of have, and there's nothing wrong with Blue. Like his athletes are fucking shredded, and he gets people ready, but he also has like I think something that's really tough to explain to people who aren't in the coaching scene is understanding that no coach is really doing anything that radically different. It's just their selection of clientele. Blue gets a lot of people who don't need that much communication. He's like, eat fucking sticks for dinner, dude, and they'll do it. And it's just like they get shredded because they have the willpower to. There's no magic. I guarantee you, it's just like Blue is very stern, and he's like, this is what needs to fucking happen. If you can't do it, you're off my team, and people do it. And so it's like they get really, really good results because they just stick to the fucking plan. There's no deviation. Uh, it's not the proviron, that's for sure. What is proviron realistically doing? Well, it's a non-anabolic hormone, that's for sure. It is a non-effective DHT. Is essentially just again binding up sex hormone binding globulin is its main intention to then free testosterone. But if you're using excessive androgens, your sex hormone binding globulin is already plummeted to the floor. It might have a impact of reversely inhibiting aromatase. But again, if you're already using a DHT, it's like, do you need that? Like, is it effective? Does it do anything for you? Is it outstanding in any kind of capacity? And the answer is definitely probably no. So I think it's probably not an effective tool in our toolbox, period. Unless you're using TRT having some sexual disorders and maybe want a little bit of a boost for a moment in time, and your sex hormone body globulin is generally already high. But we see that about after 4 weeks of treatment with proviron, this affects our the pro libido effects are sort of reversed quite quickly. So um, yeah, I think that's all
Yeah.
there can be said about that, really.
Yeah, to add to that, I legitimately have an athlete right now who's on TRT, whose sex hormone binding globulin is like 20% above the reference range, and I'm going to use 4 weeks of proviron to bring his SHBD basically into range. And that is a use case where I would use it. But I wouldn't use it in like a contest prep or almost any other scenario.
Yeah.
Where
Not to
SHBD
mention
is
like how fucking expensive it is. Like it's a very, very like buy more trend, dude. Like I think that's gonna be way more effective than buying more proviron or growth hormone or fucking anything.
I really want to find out what fucking forum the fucking mega dose proviron pre-contest came, because it's not the first time I had guys tell me like, yeah, 100 milligrams or 200 milligrams proviron daily.
It's crazy. Like, it's crazy.
Am I missing something?
Yeah, and it's like effectively mute. It's not doing anything. So it's like, what am I using this for? And you know, it's like it's this weird thing because you get these dudes who are really emotionally attached. Like, I'll build a supplement protocol for someone, and they're like, you know, why isn't this in there? Why isn't astragalus not in there? Or like, why is, you know, my citrus bergamot not in there or something? And like we looked at your labs, dude. Like, you don't need this stuff, and it could be used as a prophylactic, but sometimes we just don't need it, and it's expensive. I'd rather you spend it on growth hormone right now, to be real with you. And in 12 weeks, if we pull labs and it's like, hey, things are going not the good way, then we'll have it in, and it's a precautionary thing. But I think the reality is like having these emotional attachments to certain products. Like people will not order supplements, and I'm guilty of this too. They'll get anxious because they don't have a specific supplement in their regimen, like omega-3 fatty acids, for example. Like someone might miss their fish oil dose, and they're like, holy fuck, my brain's gonna rot, and I'm not gonna be like, you know, it's like, no, dude, like it barely, when we say things are beneficial, they're like 5 to 3% beneficial. You know, it's like so marginal that it doesn't even really matter. And I think that's the case with proviron. Is it's like, let's just say it does have a benefit. For the several hundreds of dollars you'll be spending on it per week to dose it effectively for a prep, quote unquote, I don't think the cost is worth the benefit. And again, I would rather use something like just more fucking Mastron, or, you know, something that's relevant and much, much cheaper. Period. And another thing here too is like, I'm very fortunate to be in a group of we both are, with multiple people of, you know, Vigorous Steve, Paul, Roman Fritz, all the guys, John Jewett, like, and I think Roman says it the best. He's like, people are just fucking stupid. He's like, I use test, equipoise, primobolan, growth hormone, and insulin. And he's like, I've never used anything else. And that is it. He's like, besides injectable anadrol, he loves fucking injectable anadrol. He's like, I will never stop taking that. So, but he says that's like all you need to grow. And he never has used proviron. He doesn't use tren. He doesn't. It's just like these kind of predeterminations of what you need to be a bodybuilder are so radical. And I think it's, again, it's perpetuated by these individuals who have a great roster of athletes. Like, no doubt about it, they're good coaches, but again, having that understanding that it's selective coaching. You know, these individuals have an audience who's very specific, who is in a very big niche, right? And they're able to pick from the best of the best. It allows them to have amazing outcomes in their preps, even no matter, like, irrelevant of what drugs they use, right? So yeah, that's the big piece there.
Yeah, that's why I try to coach everyone 5'2" and under. If you're a hobbit, come my way.
Yeah, dude, I'll take you. Those muscle bellies are nice and short. They're not lengthened out. We're good. Like, I'll do that shit all day long. Yeah. No, seriously, dude. And it's like, it's funny because another tangent here, but I just got an athlete the other day, and he literally hasn't trained for fucking 4 months, and the homie is straight up like more jacked than you or I, and he hasn't fucking ate anything correct. He's been a fat ass and is looking jacked as shit. And he's like, yeah, I want to do a prep. And I was like, all right. And he's like, I know it's against what you think, but can we do one in like 12 weeks? And I was like, and you haven't trained? And he's like, no. And I'm like, dude, fuck it. Like, I think it'll be fine, you know? And it's like, he literally goes to the gym for a day, gets a pump, sends me a picture. I'm like, what the fuck? Like what just
Wait,
happened?
that the guy sent in the group chat?
Yes, that's him.
Shit.
He hasn't trained. Those pictures, he hasn't been training, right? So like,
what the fuck? I thought that was like,
dude, so I'm like, what the fuck is this guy made out of? So like, when you get athletes like that, it's like, no shit, these coaches are gonna have great rosters of people and all these great pictures, but the reality is out of 100 clients, 5 of them are going to be great. And then you just keep recycling that 5 and then find those pictures and post them. And that's a lot of what you'll tend to see. Now, the guy who coaches, 500 people in the shadows does a lot of fucking work that other guy doesn't do, but it just doesn't get the notoriety. And I think that's why Proviron is seen as like this magical thing.
Well, for me, and last thing I'll say about, for me personally, I'm very impressed by coaches like Justin Harris who take regular Joe Blow and turn them into IFBB Pro.
And no one talks about that too. Like Homeboy makes a fucking pro every year, like several times a year, and no one talks about it.
I want to say he's. I'm speculating here, but I think he is like one of the highest amount of pro cards.
Yeah, it's well over 100. I know that.
Yeah, it is over 100. Yeah.
And it's funny you say, because he will just take a normal dude and work with him for 3 years and like be very consistent, and bada bing bada boom, he's a fucking pro,
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question.
So this is another good one, Joe R. This might be one of my clients again. I don't actually know. Jose Ramirez, maybe. Why is calcium used pre-workouts? Well, calcium ions are really important for muscle contractions. And if we don't have an effective degree of calcium, which again, it's something I talk about a lot, but bodybuilders generally don't have calcium intake like at all. So I usually do recommend dairy sources. Like I just made a post yesterday about raw cheese, Greek yogurts, even like kefir as milk. Those are really easy to digest dairy sources that have also a plethora of calcium pre-workout in small volumes, because that little degree of calcium, or if they can't take it, I usually use calcium lactate. It can influence, in my mind, it can influence calcium ion related contractions and relate to better degrees of output in the gym, potentially, right? This is, hypothetically, it's not probably concrete in research, at least not that I've seen anywhere. And this is sort of my postulation.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. My understanding was that calcium can facilitate the interaction between actin and myosin.
Yeah.
So when you have muscle contractions, calcium enables that interaction. So I wouldn't say you necessarily need like shitload pre-workout, because I would also argue that for some individuals who, giving a lot of calcium comes from dairy products. Some individuals don't handle dairy products too well. So if you're having a shitload of dairy pre-workout and it's fucking digestion, probably not. But as you said, like, a little bit of calcium and then obviously calcium throughout the day would help facilitate that. So that's just have a good macronutrient dense diet. I don't think you need to be mega dosing calcium pre-workout.
Yeah. No, I could agree. Like generally, if you're getting 1,000 to 1.2 grams of calcium a day, this is something you super need to worry about. But I just find that it's so prevalent that just majority of people don't get calcium. So it's
you have to drink 2 liters of chocolate milk.
Correct. 2 liters per day of chocolate milk with Lucky Charms, and that's how you make gains. Do you guys eat ass? Sometimes, honestly, it's quite nice. Okay. Yo, what's up, Kolton? Just came across your content a few weeks ago and absolutely love it. Hey man, I appreciate that. Thank you, dude. Do 212 competitors need GH to be in a competition, or can they get by with just androgens? So
no, because they'll grow taller.
What's that?
No, because they'll grow taller.
That's an excellent response.
Sammy G, I would just quickly say that it really depends on your genetics, propensity to build muscle, your muscle bellies, because PDs simply facilitate our ability to build muscle. So if you can get from A to B using, I'm just make something up, just testosterone, or I think like Lee Priest said he just used like testosterone and nandrolone, and looking at his genetics, I kind of actually believe him, to get in the conditioning he did. Yeah, you can get away with it. But if you're an individual who doesn't have the best genetics potential response to androgens or PEDs, then you might have to use the kitchen sink. It really is individual.
Yeah. And I think if you wanted a general answer, the majority of people is going to be yes. Like you'll likely need some degree of GH to be effective. But saying that, Andrew Jacked was for a long time too afraid to take growth hormone. He was very open about this. I just don't think many people followed along. He wouldn't use growth hormone up until like two years ago, like the end of last Olympia season, right? So he has been very cautious of that, and obviously he's very Of course, he increased his placing with growth hormone, so maybe that's another use case to look at and say yes. But I think for most, and Keon Pearson, he works out in Dallas. He's right here at Destination Dallas, so I see him often, and I know a lot of the people who train with him. He, for his prep with P Tour, Patrick Tour, yes, he was only taking 200 milligrams of testosterone and like 400 milligrams of Mastron for the whole prep for the most part.
Oh, fuck God.
Yeah, and so this is like, he doesn't lie about his shit. He's very open and honest, and I believe him. Granted, this is a guy who effectively got to the Olympia naturally, right? Like in classic physique. So there is individuals who could probably do it, but I don't think it's going to be very exceptional. Literally, like 1 in 20 people might have that ability, but most probably don't. Arguably. Okay, Dylan Rosselier. How to eat like a bodybuilder in the off season while doing extensive studying. I'm eating about 4.5 Ks, very clean, but even still this is a tough one. Brain fog sucks. I am taking alpha GPC and other nootropics. This is actually a really fucking tough question. And I'll let you go first. I'll kind of try to postulate.
I've actually had a fair bit of experience with this because, like, a little bit about myself. I actually was a corporate accountant, chartered accountant, and actually had a law degree. So I did like 10 years of studying whilst bodybuilding. And long story short, I feel you there, man. It's tough. But one thing that I would do to basically get by is obviously like meal prep, have your meals there, but try have your meals at strategic times. What I mean by that is I would actually have like a small meal, knock out a chunk of work, larger meal, maybe go train or have a break, do some sort of physical activity, then have another block of studying. So instead of like large meal, go study, you're almost half asleep and do that. So try have your meals somewhat strategically. And I'll be honest, something is maybe more individual to me, depending on appetite. But I was able to have smaller, more frequent meals. So it wasn't because like, 12 meals a day, rich pound, I get huge. It was because literally I found that a certain meal volume, a certain meal size would just like knock me out. Because if you try to do 3-4 meals a day of like 4,500 calories plus, that is going to be a huge food volume, which is going to put you to sleep. So what I found was almost like grazing, constant smaller meals throughout the day, definitely assisted with that. And then strategically placing them like, block of study, I would have a protein feeding, which would be like minimal amounts, like honestly, sometimes just a bit of whey protein, Greek yogurt, block of studying, mini meal or like, small size meal, exercise, and then that's when I was probably eating the most amount of meals a day. I think I was anywhere from like 7 to 8. Wow. I'm not necessarily saying you say this, but that what I found helped with the brain fog. And then, as you said, yes, I did use nootropics. And again, this is not medical advice, but I also use like ADHD medication at certain points, things like modafinil, things like dexamphetamine. Not necessarily saying you do that. I would definitely say find a non-pharmacological intervention. But at the same time, my man, like, unfortunately, bodybuilding is not conducive to many things. Is it possible? Yes. But like, for instance, I've had it before where I've had to pull out of preps where I've been prepping myself because the brain fog was too much and I literally couldn't complete my studies. So, I appreciate you putting in the work and, studying and eating like a bodybuilder, but try this smaller meal volume and try strategic placing. But as Kolton said, it's kind of one of those things where there's no real way around it. 4,500 calories is 4,500 calories. Dude.
Yeah, I mean, and I I've done extensive studying as well. I got my degree in science and nutrition, but it's more about, for me, it's like running a business. And like, for example, right, this is a great example. I have real estate as well. One of my tenants is not paying her rent, and she has 2 kids, and she hasn't paid the electric bill, so they shut the electricity off. Didn't know about this until like early this morning. So I've been like trying to hustle and figure all that out whilst also getting on calls with like First Attachment Nutrition and clients and like all this jazz, right? So like my day is like very much back to back to back, and I need to be available cognitively to do it. And the answer is it sucks, but it's like sometimes you just have to liberate meals in a different way. So like one thing I do and I practice a lot is waking up extra early and like not eating, like get like a good 4 or 5 hours of work done as soon as I can, slam back some caffeine, and just like rip out as much work while I'm sort of in this fasted state, because you're still hyper sort of cognitive in this state. And I think if you can get those deep hours of work done, even if you're waking up really fucking early, like 4 a.m., 5 a.m., this is very normal for me. I think it's still way more effective because you have no distractions and then the food's not slowing you down. Then what I would do subsequently is, as you start eating, try to leverage fats outside of your workout window, and then a lot of carbohydrates, especially if you're needing to focus on cognitive work. It's like most of the carbohydrates are directly around your workout. So pre, intra, and post. So like, yeah, you're going to have to slam like 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrate during the workout, and then after and post, before and post workout. But if you can do that, then you kind of stave yourself off from having that insulin mediated central nervous system depression that causes you to have that grogginess and sleepiness and like really tough time staying focused. The other, again, non-doctor related advice here is modafinil is an outstanding drug. I try to refrain from using it as much as possible, and I've actually not used it for several months now. But it is like a great thing to pull out your back pocket if you got some really heavy work to do, and just drop 100 milligrams and rock, like, and just seriously make it work. Um, the other thing is also, unfortunately, it's like amphetamines, like Adderall or the other types, right? Depending on what country you're in, obviously, it can change this. What I think from your name, at least, it sounds like you're an American. This would be something you could leverage. And it's unfortunate that it has to come to that, but it is a very, very effective mediator of basically just a shit ton of epinephrine in your brain, and you can just roll on forward even if there is insulin present or a high degree of growth hormone. And that's another thing. If you are, a NPC based athlete or a non-natural athlete, using your growth hormone at the correct time would be really important as well. So I would even use it a little earlier than your typical bedtime, maybe an hour or two earlier than bedtime, so that by the time you wake up, and I would do intramuscular versus sub-Q, but by the time you wake up, hopefully the elevated growth hormone is mediated, and you're not as groggy as you would be, depending on how much growth hormone you're taking and whatnot. But
Yeah. I would also like to stipulate, and this is also a bit controversial, but what I would also do, because Kolton, touched on modafinil, and I've mentioned dexamphetamine and other, ADHD medication, they do massively suppress appetite. So
yeah,
if like, I'm just going to make the assumption that when you're studying, there are some exams, or you have an exam period that you have. So what I would do is, because I would always try to be in a surplus in the majority of time, because as bodybuilders, we want to be in a surplus in the majority of time to build muscle. But I would actually plan out my semester, and maybe just this is just the undiagnosed autism coming through. But I would plan out my semester that I would basically be in an accumulation growth phase up until about 2 weeks before exams.
yeah,
And 2 weeks before exams, I would start using the ADHD medication to get deeper study in, which would suppress my appetite, and I would actually implement a strategic mini cut. During the exam period, I would actually get really lean and basically lean out for like 2-3 weeks, which would act as my mini cut, which means I would lean less meals. The ADHD medication would suppress my appetite. I have a really great cognitive function. I could smash on my studying. Then by the end of the exam block, I was like pretty lean, and I would start my surplus phase again. And then I would actually use exam periods as mini cut phases for myself, 2 to 3 times a year. And that would be just built into my periodization of my training and dieting. And it actually worked quite well. In fact, I did that for 6 years that I was at university.
yeah. And there's, there's different isomers to amphetamines too, and you can. I don't want to get into amphetamines because it's a very touchy topic, and there is a lot of cardiomyopathy that's related to it, and it's not cardiomyopathy, um, uh, cardiovascular trauma, right? Like heart hypertrophy and very problematic things there. But there's two different isomers. There's L-amphetamine or levoamphetamine, and then there's dexoamphetamine or D-amphetamine, and they're both a little bit different in how they're targeting your central nervous system. So if one was to use one or the other, I would really focus maybe on dex dexoamphetamine, just D-amphetamine, we'll just call it that.
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, because it's less it's less potent in a physiological sense, where you're having appetite downregulation and the shakes and like the sort of like elevated heart rate and stuff. You're still going to get that, but not to the same degree as what you would with, for example, like Adderall has a lot of L-amphetamine. you would get more of the cognitive effects, which doesn't make it better for a lot of people. It actually can make it worse, but it's in this instance, it might be one of those better things because you still need to eat food and you still need to, train effectively and not be getting the shakes while you're training. I find that actually fucks me up more than not. I mean, when you're training with amphetamines, it's like that is the way to get injuries essentially. So yeah. I hope that helps. As highly
Last thing I will say this, and again, not medical advice, if you do go down the dexamphetamine path, do not use the dosage prescribed for ADHD patients, which is like 20 milligrams of dexamphetamine. Literally, if you were, again, not medical advice, like 5 milligrams. Like you can even try one milligram, probably too little, but about 5 milligrams. And also why, what Kolton touched on, I also would prepare or be more partial to dexamphetamines. It has a shorter half-life because things like Adderall, actually Adderall is quite short too, but things like Vyvanse are very long acting. And if you need to sleep or eat food, that can be an issue too. To be honest, I would say if you are doing exam period, just try caffeine by itself, then maybe try modafinil, and then if you can get a prescription for dexamphetamine and try that as a point of call. But just be, as Kolton said, very cautious because there are potential negative cardiovascular, adaptions or consequences from these drugs, which is why you have to be very careful.
Yeah. And I think I didn't mean to bring amphetamines out like they're the best option, because it's definitely like if I had my choice even now, I would still pick modafinil over amphetamines just because of the lower. It's more of a cholinergic drug, so you don't have that epinephrine related response where your heart rate elevates and you're just like a fucking spaz, which I don't think is good for anyone long enough of exposure. So that was a lot of questions, Adam.
Yeah, guys, we appreciate it. That was great.
Yeah, I think the Q&A is growing for sure, which I absolutely love to see.
I think we might have to keep it on longer because I think people take a little bit of time to, get on and hop on. It's just us talking shit for the first 30 minutes.
Yeah, we could always do that. We always do it anyways, so fuck it. Cool. Well, do you have anything else to address today, or?
I think that pretty much covers it. I'm just off to Bangkok. Going to see Steve and the boys this weekend.
Cheesecake Factory?
Cheesecake Factory, yeah. I'll try to record it all so you can live vicariously through us. But I've got my Orly stat metformin ready.
Have you seen look at their shrimp Alfredo on either your phone or once you get there. It's about 3,100 calories and has over 180 grams of fat in it. So it's legit.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I'm just not a big fan of like super fatty food. It actually throws me off.
Me either.
Like, give me carbs and protein. Like, fuck.
Like honestly, a steak and fries, dude. I'm so happy with that. Like a little differently cooked steak with some fries. Like that's lovely. I love that.
I'm legitimately not saying that, but like I'm not just saying that for the sake of saying it. Like I legitimately, when people offer me like super deep fried and fatty shit, it literally just turns me off.
I'm like, no, I'm the same way. I'm the same exact way. I will say their burger, they have like I think like one burger that's their signature burger. It is absolutely fucking delicious. That is totally worth it. But I don't know what else they got. So
there's like I think there's like 6, 7, 8 bodybuilders going. So we're gonna try to clean the place out as best we can.
That's fucking awesome. All right, man. Well, I appreciate your time. I appreciate everyone being here and asking good questions too. If you guys want to catch this next week, it is always going to be on Thursdays around 7:15 p.m. CST. What time is that in not Australia, in Thailand for those who?
Thailand, that is about 8 a.m. And if you're in Australia, that is around 11 a.m.
Hell yeah. That's great. All over the world, baby. Let's do it. All right, peeps. Thank you so much and have a beautiful day.